Welcome everyone this glorious morning in October. It's just a real pleasure to be here, to have you with us. Before I start the more formal introduction, let's just pause for a moment of prayer. Creator, loving God, thank you for being with us this morning, for blessing us with generations of life. Be with us as we seek to learn from each other how to love and communicate more effectively. Bless those people that are and have been in harm's way as natural disasters and storms have wreaked havoc and seek to do so again. Bless those folks in the throes of war and pestilence and hatred. Remember that you have been with us and your love is with us through all time, and that you are still with us and supporting us. And thank you for those who are with us here this morning. Amen.
Amen.
So it's with great pleasure that just one moment, technical stuff. Come on. That we have with us, first of all, a child of the church, Allison Brown, who is not only the child of Gail and George and of all of us as the part of the congregation. We've seen her grow and grow, and she's now has a master's in professional counseling. She's child and family therapist. She's director of counseling at the Tender Hearts Counseling Center. And also she brings with us Aubrey Berry, who has a doctorate in crisis and community counseling. She's a teen, adult, and couples counselor. And our ask was a simple ask. How during this time of anxiety and uncertainty and differences, how can we improve and make intergenerational communication more effective? So I'm going to now turn this over mainly to Aubrey. I guess Allison will probably also be with us. Thank you, Aubrey. Thanks so much for being
It's so
with
great
us.
to see you all. It's so great to be able to sit here with you guys and talk about communication and connect in this way. I'm just going to share my screen so everyone can kind of see what my PowerPoint is. Like Carol mentioned, it's a pretty broad scope and field to discuss communication in general, right? People spend their entire lives devoted to little subsects of that and develop mastery there. It's a very complex topic. The area that we chose to focus on is the area of connection. Allison has an amazing quote that I have stolen from her and use all the time, which is, we all have the same basic needs.
We all have the same desire. We all want our families to be happy and healthy and live in a really caring community. We just all have a different view of how to get there. And that's where the differences are. And that's where our conflict comes from.
That's where the disconnect comes from a lot of times. What we see as the right way forward, whatever the category may be, is where we develop disconnect. And it's where we feel ourselves getting gravitated to certain groups and then getting a little bit entrenched in those groups, right? Where we start to view other people that are outside of that subset as people that are kind of against our principles, our philosophies, and our desires, if we don't keep in mind that we're all kind of working towards those same goals. All right. So, like I said, we decided to focus on connection as our topic today. So we're going to go through, kind of give some base terms, definitions, types of connection, talk about how they all interweave together, talk about the benefits, the challenges, or more specifically, the barriers to effective communication, technology's impact on communication and connection, because that is just completely unavoidable in this day and age. And like I was mentioning to Carol, technology makes our life so much easier, faster, quicker, but also adds so much complexity and more openness to challenge and more openness to miscommunication a lot of times. And then we're going to talk about some techniques to improve communication and connection. So if we term connection, it's really just that desire for closeness, whether that's with other people or that internalized belief of our sense of self. So who are we as people? How do we view ourselves? How we fit into the world at large? How we view the world at large? All of those things combine to our sense of self. Having that strong sense of self are those things that lead to increased self-confidence, self-worth, and the ability to stand firm in our beliefs. Now, the three main types of connection are intrapersonal, that's that sense of self-connection, the relationship that I have with me. Interpersonal connection, which is how I interact and connect with other people around me, those people at the world at large, and then transpersonal connection. And this one's interesting. This one it's where interpersonal and transpersonal connection come to meet is here in the church community, right? These spiritual belief systems, these spiritual awakenings. Some people believe that, right before you die, or you have like a life-altering experience, that connection to the non-concrete world is another realm of connection that is really all leading into, in order to feel ultimate connection, all three of these have to be in alignment, have to feel a firm sense of strength and foundation to it. So when we look at self-connection, that's investing in the things that we know are good for us. No, not necessarily leaning into the wants, leaning into the needs, what's best for me. Not looking at in the here and now, what's easiest, quickest, but what is going to create the most long-term benefit. And then we have micro connections. We have these all the time. If you're, like me, and you're part of the little treat culture, you're going to go get a coffee, you interact with the barista, that's that micro connection. These little bursts of communication that we have with people, but it stays so surface level. We don't really talk about anything deep. It doesn't really impact our day that much. We're able to water off a duck's back, even if we have a negative experience with that. And then we get to relational connections. These are the people that we call on for help when we need it. It's our wider community. These can be surface level, or they can be a little bit deeper, depending on how much vulnerability we choose to have in our relationships. We all have families that are very close knit. We know everybody's business. Then we also have family systems where everyone has a little bit more boundaries set up. We don't dive as deep. We keep things a little bit closed off. We just present the mask that we want people to see, right? And relational connection doesn't necessarily just mean family connection. It means our communities, our churches, these types of people that we feel like are extended family systems in a way. And our tendency when we come up and show up in community especially is to mask a little bit, right? We want people to see the best version of this. This will come into play later on with technology. We're not interested, and our goal isn't to share the deep vulnerabilities, our fears, those types of things, is to present the best version of ourselves, to make ourselves likable. That's because we're hardwired to really lean into connection, to want other people to like us, to want to like other people. And then we have intimate connection. And this is really where we go and we take that deep vulnerability. We just want a sense of understanding. We want to be able to go to people that know us inside and out, accept us as we are, flaws and everything in between, and they allow us to be ourselves. It requires a lot of vulnerability, and in order to be vulnerable, it takes a lot of risk, right? We may put ourselves all the way out there, share deep things about ourselves, open up that inner layer. It might not be for everybody, right? Some people are like, that just doesn't vibe with me. And we have to have that strong sense of self or intrapersonal connection in order to recognize that's okay. It's not going to influence how I feel about myself. And then we have collective connection, which is that sense of belonging and affiliation. That's where it's like we feel like we're all part of the team. We're working together. We have shared goals. We have shared vision. We're moving forward on a similar path together. And all of these are required to have that good inter and intrapersonal connection. Why connection? We are hardwired for it. Our brain, according to Harvard University research, is hardwired to seek out connection. And that's basically several different ways for that. There are mirror pathways that light up when we see either pain or pleasure experienced by other people. It's like when you watch those videos where like the soldier comes home from deployment, sees their family. We don't know these people, but we feel touched by it. And that's our innate cognitive ability to connect with other people. Same when we see somebody, you know, they run, they fall down, we're like, ah, you know, we catch our breath a little bit. We feel that pain, we feel that embarrassment. We know how that's felt. We are hardwired in our cognitive pathways to seek out that connection. And we use less brain function when we connect with people and we communicate with people that have our same belief system. It's interesting. They recently did research with the University of London, and they looked at MRIs and they saw, okay, what part of people's brains light up when they talk to people that have shared value systems and those that don't. And what they found was really interesting in that if you have a certain type of mindset, perhaps it's a little bit more traditional or a little bit more conservative, different parts of your brain will light up if you are, you know, so inclined to think that way as you are inclined to think more liberally, so to speak. So we use less brain power when we talk to people that have our shared belief system. Our brain is like a muscle, right? What you flex is going to get stronger. Our ability to use it comes more naturally. So when we're talking to someone that doesn't have a shared belief system or just doesn't think the way that we do, it actually causes our brain to work a little bit harder. And that cognitive struggle is difficult for us. We want easy, right? Life is hard enough. Like we want to lean into the things that are easier. And that's where the same as me mentality comes from. We're like, okay, can kind of take a break. I can take a breather. I can connect with this person. That also leads into, traditionally speaking, more vulnerability. We feel like if someone gets that part of us, it's like, okay, they're going to understand me a little bit easier because we have that shared connection. And because it's easier for us, we naturally seek out people that think similarly to us, which can cause a little bit of a challenge, which we'll discuss in a bit. The benefits of connection, it's a staple for mental health, right? All of the research and literature shows it lowers depression, anxiety, it increases that sense of self and confidence, our ability to move in the world and connect with other people. It also takes care of two of the states of wellness, and that's emotional and social. So if we have good communication skills, we have good connection, two of those sections in our general wellness are already taken care of, which is really great. It's also a staple of our physical health. Everything that we know about it is that connection and positive communication with people. No, positive communication doesn't mean we all agree all the time, but we have conversations that aren't aggressive or hostile or leading to people feeling attacked. It will actually reduce the risk of things like stroke, heart disease, dementia, even bolsters your immunity. So even like colds during the winter, you're having good connections with people, you're less likely to get them. And also increases our life expectancy. And again, communication is not necessarily connection, right? It can go either way. We have ability to reach out and connect to somebody, or we have that ability to create distance. It just depends on how we go about that. So our communication goals are to either perform or inform, persuade, motivate, influence, or lastly, connect. But connection is not a guarantee. And if you look at the majority of those, they want you to do something. It's looking for some kind of response. Join in my mentality, do this thing, join this club. They're all very action driven. Connection is the one that's a bit more passive, right? It enables us just to kind of sit and be with who we are. Our connection goals are to create understanding, a shared identity, and a sense of belonging. So the connection barriers are communication goals. Are we having a conversation with somebody because we want to change their mind, because we want them to align with us? If that's our goal, connection may or may not come across. We also have the tendency to create echo chambers, right? Because it feels more comfortable for us to talk to people that have our same belief system, and we naturally gravitate towards those people. Those are the voices that we hear all the time. And so that's what we get into our mind is like, this is the norm, and this is the way of doing things, as opposed to considering all alternatives. When we get so laser focused, we tend to put those blinders on ourselves, and we just see our path and our thinking as the ultimate way. But really, we're kind of hiding from, there's so many alternatives. Things in life really are never black and white. There's so much gray area. We have to allow for that alternative to exist to our ways of thinking. And we have to also look at our distress tolerance. If we keep ourselves locked in these echo chambers where the only thing that we hear is the stuff that we agree with, when we hear a dissenting opinion, it's really going to cause us a lot of distress. And our distress tolerance is something we want to work on to get like very well balanced. Too little, and we're kind of falling apart at everything. Too high, and we're accepting behavior that is completely unacceptable. Lack of boundaries, tolerating abuses, those types of things. So it's really important to have just the right amount of distress tolerance. And in doing so, if we find ourselves in these echo chambers, the one way to move through that is by exposure, opening yourself up to hear more ideas, getting to know the people behind those ideas as well. And then one of the biggest barriers in connection is the upswing in technology. It's one of those unavoidable things that's just a part of life now, but it can cause a lot of chaos and contention. Let's look at social media to begin. Social media has been kind of demonized in society at large, kind of for a reason, but it's not all negative, right? There are some positive aspects to it. It allows us to connect to our family that maybe live across country, or it allows us to find our friends from high school and see what they're doing. But it also gives us a false sense of connection. We see these people, we see what they're doing, we see people having kids and grandkids and moving and retiring, but we don't really know what's going on with them. We don't have that real awareness of their life. Social media, Instagram, it gives us this opportunity to create a cultivated life of what we want other people to see from us, which is not necessarily the reality. People don't really be like, hey, had a horrible day at work today, and post that up on social media. But those are the things that really help us understand people and who they are. But so we're cutting ourselves off from that. We're cutting ourselves off from that vulnerability. And social media pressure encourages us to do the same things. So when we do hear from somebody from high school reach out to us, we're more likely just to be like, oh yeah, I'm great. Are you great? We're all great. When in reality, like, we're probably not, and that's okay. It also creates a completely unrealistic expectation of what our relationships and connections should look like. We see the long posts for people's spouses, which statistically speaking, usually indicates that that relationship is having a little bit of trouble, according to recent research. But we see that and we're like, oh my gosh, I don't feel that way about my partner all the time. Like, what's wrong with us? What's wrong with you? And it creates this dynamic of tension that shouldn't necessarily exist, because every relationship is problematic. Everybody has flaws. I look at relationships like, you're at the train station and you're going to get on one, and every single one has a fire somewhere on that train. You just have to decide which one you can operate with. And you kind of roll down those tracks for the relationship. And this leads to a decrease in relational satisfaction. We tend to cycle through relationships. If there's a problematic friend, we're like, this is too much work, I'm out, right? Or this relationship, this marriage, like, we don't seem as happy as they do. I think I could be happier. I want to get out. And it creates that what's next mentality for our connections, instead of looking at it as like, okay, hey, how do we work together? How do we figure out common ground and continue on in this relationship? It also disrupts our existing relationships. As you can see in this photo, I was like, yep, that's pretty much it, right? Like, we come home, we see our partner, we're like, okay, how was your day? And we're on our phones or we're watching TV. It keeps us really disconnected from the here and now. It also provides us a little bit of escapism, some like potentially distractive disassociation, where when life gets hard, instead of leaning to our social supports, which is the number one preventative for developing PTSD after a traumatic event, is that reliance on social supports. All of a sudden, we're just kind of spacing out. We're getting a temporary break from our problems, but they never really go away. And as soon as we log off, we're still sitting entrenched with all of the same challenges that we had before. And so it really kind of keeps us from being able to stay present, look at the people that are here in our life, and work to improve those existing relationships. The other one is the news. Recent statistics have shown that watching the news on a daily basis increases your sympathetic nervous system responses. So that means the cortisol and adrenaline that's getting released into your system and the neural pathways that are being released through those stress hormones are causing our amygdala to become activated. And that's the part of our brain that's responsible for fight, flight, or freeze, right? There's danger. So we feel like we need to take action of some sort. There's also a really interesting amygdala response that they're just starting to study that they have seen primarily develop in women, which is the concept of tend and befriend, where it's like, okay, crisis is coming. I'm latching onto my social supports, getting connected with them. I'm bouncing ideas off of them. I'm feeling unconditionally safe and supported in those healthy relationships. And I feel like, okay, the danger feels less. I can problem solve and find my way through. And it also creates, looking at the news on a daily basis, creates a sense of overwhelm. Over 70% of adults have reported being anxious about current events, and there's a lot to be anxious for. We also have unprecedented access to all of the challenging things that are going on in life, right? Pre-social media and pre-24-hour news cycle, we didn't really hear about, a volcano erupting in some faraway land. It wasn't something that we created as our immediate problem. But now we have so much access to it, we can't help but hear, oh my gosh, there's bad things happening all of the time. And it feels very oppressive. We also can feel very isolated in these instances. I'm just one person, what can I do? We feel disconnected from even being able to help others. And 66% of adults report feeling compassion fatigue. It's like, how many things can I really have the care for? I cannot care for every single thing that happens in life. It's just impossible. We all have like an energy tank. And that goes for our physical energy, just like our mental and emotional energy. And as we care and invest in things, that tank gets lower and lower and lower. So to some degree, we have to be selective about how we spend our mental and emotional energy because it is so limited. And with the busyness of scheduling and technology allowing us to be more connected, doing more things, it really burns out a lot quicker than it used to. The election cycles. These are known to increase a couple of things. Anxiety, depression, sense of isolation. 73% of adults reported feeling anxiety and concern connected to this election coming up in a month. And it's coming from a very specific reason. The marketers and the public relations people, I can say this, having used to work in public affairs, they are not looking to connect us. They're looking for some of those communication goals. Convince. They want you to take action. They want to influence you. All of those things that are not geared towards connection, broad scale connection, right? So we have systematic messaging going on. It's us versus them. And we want to be seen that way by the media campaigns. That creates alignment with some people where it's like, hey, we are on the same team. We have the same beliefs. Cool. And it also creates alienation. You don't believe these same things. You're on the outside. That creates a lot of animosity. It creates that us versus them mentality. When really, like Allison mentioned, kind of all just want the same goals and we have the same desires in life. But we get so lost in that when we look at the finer details of how we're going about that. So how do we kind of circumnavigate some of those things and lean into maintaining communication and connection? The first one is really reevaluating our goals of communication. When we sit down with somebody, our primary goal should not be to convince them of our argument. Like, we're not lawyers, we're not in the courtroom, we're just people living our lives. Like, we should have that goal of, I just want to increase understanding. I want to be able to express myself in a way that you understand me. And I want to be able to engage in active listening so that I really understand you. I get to the root of what you're saying. I don't just sit on the surface. The other thing that we can do is really embracing empathy. Compassion comes from like, oh my gosh, I've been in this situation. I know how that feels. And it's horrible. So I'm able to be there as a support. Empathy really doesn't have that understanding, that intimate understanding. It's kind of like, I don't know how it feels, but I want to imagine what it's like to step into your shoes. And so we practice that and we realize, okay, I don't know what set of experiences or messaging, you've grown up with, but let me try to understand why it is that you hold these beliefs or why it is you think this way. And then we want to embrace some of these healthy communication techniques. The first one is active listening. That saying that's like, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth because we should be listening twice as much as we speak. But there's validity to that. So often we are in such a rush to say our next point. We really don't even sit with what the other person is saying. We're going through the mental gymnastics of like, okay, that first point, they said something about me that didn't resonate. So how am I going to, present my argument of why that's not true, as opposed to sitting with it and really hearing them. This is where a good old counseling technique of paraphrasing comes in. I'm sure you guys have all heard it, whether you've been in counseling or just seen like counseling displayed on movies or media, where they're like, oh, so what I think I heard you say, and you can find obviously a much more natural way to incorporate that, but it's such a good thing. It gives us that pause where we can really sit with what somebody has said, get a little bit deeper. It also completely eradicates a lot of misunderstanding, right? If you say something to me and I run it through my own mental filters, my experiences, my upbringing, the current situation or mood that I'm in, I may think something completely different than your intentions. But if I sit and I ask the question and we come to a place of mutual understanding, it's like, okay, no miscommunication. Also feels like a huge relief for the person that's speaking. You all know how it is when you're trying to describe something and somebody really hits on what that is. And you're like, yes, it's like a physical sense of relief when somebody understands you. And that brings us to just coming into conversations with a spirit of curiosity, not really having that, underlying intention of like, well, I'm going to get them to really like see what I'm saying and take my side, but just wondering, how did you get here? What led you to this point in your narratives, in your mentality, in your inner dialogue? And kind of coming in just wanting to know about other people, as opposed to like remaining a little bit more ego focused, which is I want everyone to know about me and share my beliefs. And then we can look at for common ground. We all have something, right? Like there is something that we could all find in this room that we could connect on. And we can even find things to connect on with people that may not have our shared same belief system or thought processes as well. And once we find that common core connection, we can also practice some validation. Validation is not a blanket to just be like, whatever you want to do, whatever you want to think, like it's all good, because sometimes there's things that we think that are inaccurate. There's cognitive distortions that are really not grounded in reality. People do things that are harmful, and we're not just going to turn a blind eye, because part of connection, that deep connection, that vulnerability and intimacy comes with having to call people out and hold accountability for those that we care about. Where I see one of my friends that I just kind of went to school with, they're doing something that seems out of pocket, I'm probably not going to say anything to them. But my best friend, Laura, she's going to hear about it, whether she wants to or not. I'm going to be like, hey, what's up? And that sense of, I fully accept who you are, so you feel comfortable hearing an alternative, is why we can have that type of relationship. So if you validate, like, I can totally see like where you're coming from. You have complete autonomy to make these decisions. And, I support that. People are going to be more willing to hear some of the things that we have to say. They're a little bit more oppositional to their belief system. If we take that second, we pause and we just validate their experiences, because what they've gone through is valid. It's part of their life story, and whatever they've experienced has some validity to it. And then the last one is really just embracing that vulnerability. If you take that risk first and you share a little bit about yourself, you make yourself more humanized, people are probably going to connect with that so much quicker, and they're going to want to also be reciprocal with how much that they share. So they'll be more willing to be like, yeah, you know what, kind of going through a rough time too, or you know what, I don't even know if I really believe this, I just feel pressured to. We can kind of open up to more nuanced conversations. We're going to open it up too for like a little bit of a Q&A. Do you guys have any questions on anything?
So if you have a question, you can either raise your hand or go into the chat if you're remote, and we'll have that pause, but we welcome anybody in the room to begin the questioning
Yeah,
and the
and
discussion.
I think Allison will lead
I'm,
them.
I'm gonna
Okay.
start off with the thing that I see the most. I work with a lot of families, cause I definitely focus on the child and family side of everything. And the thing I see the most is the desire to ask a question with a motive of changing the other person's beliefs. There is a agenda in my question. And I feel like people that I say, well, how can we ask without a desired change? Just to understand why this is going on. And there is a resistance. That being able to let yourself be changed by another person. And I know I talk a lot with colleagues and family about the fact that I feel very privileged for doing my job. Because I can't have an agenda. I can't. It's not my place, it's not my job. And having people come in and honestly explore their own belief systems, especially ones that are contradictory to mine, has allowed me to grow and develop. And sometimes it does cement some of my beliefs more solidly, but I have changed my view and the openness I have from being willing to let the other people impact me and influence me just as much as I am there to support them. And I think that that was a very hard thing for me to achieve in my practice in the beginning, because the idea of letting me be changed in the process was really hard.
And Allison brings up a couple of really great points with that, right? Statistically speaking, if we come in with an agenda, it leads to both sides just getting entrenched in what they already believed in the first place. It's like, we've all seen the Facebook arguments, right? Like, nobody is really going to be like, oh, you know what? You're right. I've never seen it. Never, but if we go in with that shared goal of connection, it's more likely. Also, too, it's okay for us to change our beliefs. As you gain more information, it's okay to do things differently. You think about like our medical advances. We accept all of those, right? We get more information. We're like, okay, let's use it. None of us would be like, oh, no, thanks. I don't want to be put under for surgery. We embrace that new knowledge in a really impactful way. And so if we get new knowledge, it's really important to be open to changing our belief system too.
Jean Dudek has a question remotely. There she is.
Yes, you had a slide about the impact of watching the news and how that can increase anxiety and stuff. And the graphic on there showed a TV screen, and you did talk about us watching the news. Did they look into a comparison between getting your news through TV versus, say, reading a newspaper?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes and no. It still gives us that mentality of the world is burning, but in a slightly less impacted way, because, and you bring up a great point, TV pairs with visuals, right? And so we're getting it in a way that feels very real to us. We're actually seeing these things unfold in real time. We're watching the disasters in some regards, in some respects. And so television does have a more significant impact on that negative mindset than either listening to the news or reading the newspaper in general. Yeah, great question. So if you're looking to like stay informed, but you're like, maybe not as intensely burden myself with compassion fatigue, looking at alternative sources like podcasts and either like radio or print is a great idea.
Remember with 9/11 when they talked about it kept happening over and over, showed it over and over, and they said for children, they kept seeing it, and they couldn't figure out necessarily that it wasn't happening again. So that's another thing for TV is
Yeah.
I would say that I find really challenging how to try to get beyond that superficial, I think I know what you're saying, to doing the questioning, the prodding, and still feeling like you're not judging, but you need to know more, because sometimes the communication with my younger relatives it's just really hard to understand. And so, and I do need more information, and I'm just wondering, do you have
Yeah.
some tips about
Yeah,
that?
absolutely. So it's like leaning into I language versus you language, right? Like I'm having a hard time understanding. Like I really appreciate you taking the time. Like anything positive, we're going to ascribe to them. Anything that presents challenge, we're going to subscribe to us, you know? I just want to know more about this. I'm having difficulty understanding, or like I just want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly, because my mind's been all over the place today. And expressing that gratitude. Like, I just really appreciate us being able to sit down and talk about this. Like, I love getting to know you more. You know, everything that we see is that positive reinforcement is way more effective than negative, right? So just thanking them for their approach, like even if we don't agree with it, is another way to really facilitate that openness. And then just not being afraid to be a little bit vulnerable, right? Where it's like this generation, just like you know, it's there's a barrier, or like the communication or the slang, you know, I'm just having a hard time keeping up with it. It makes me feel isolated, and I feel bad about that. People are gonna see that vulnerability and really respond to it as well, I think.
Thanks. We have a question back here.
I'm wondering, you know, if you work with kids and teens in family work, what kind of connectional skills you see that they need most right now, or where, you know, and I don't want to, you know, demean the generation, but you know, the ones who've grown up with, technology, where do you see the biggest gaps, or do you have any advice for families on how to help kids, you know, fill those gaps in their ability to connect?
So there seems to be the distress tolerance window is very small. I want something, I'm uncomfortable, I go on my phone. We were getting all set up today, and I have the game on my phone, I play. And I was just sitting here over by myself, just playing my game, not letting anything bother me or impact me. And it just made me feel really good. And that's what all of our teens and kids do. Because they can't sit and wait. They can't sit and not be entertained. I have a lot of kids right now I'm working on being able to entertain or occupy themselves. They don't know how to do it. They have to sit in my waiting room for 5 minutes. Give me your phone. And the parents hand them their phone.
Yeah.
And so it's a cycle that just keeps going. But what I say, what do they need to work on, like really connecting with, is having the device free time, but the parents need to lead that. So a lot of the parents I work with are used to being super connected for work. And so at the dinner table, they're seeing everything on their watch, and the kids
That's
know
right.
exactly what they're doing. You're not gonna pull anything over on it, little guys, middle guys, or older guys, at all. And so being able to just go device free and sit with it and really connect. I remember as a kid, we used to have like the table talk questions to go around, but really being able to sit there and genuinely ask and model this at home. Because if they're not seeing this at home, when they go out into public, whatever they're seeing at home is what they expect. That is their norm. And so being able to sit and genuinely ask, and asking a broad question like, how was your day? You are not going to get a good answer. But I love asking leading questions. I want to hear 2 great things that happened today. And I ask to lead with positive first. Because if our mindset starts on the positive and we start looking for the positive, then it teaches kids that they can choose what they focus on. And they have that choice every day. Do I focus on the fact that I just bombed a test and now I'm going into another test in another class? How do I refocus that? But they learn that when they're in elementary school, having just had a fight with one friend and getting left on the field at recess and being able to go integrate into another group because they know that they're liked, they're wanted, and they have that ability to go engage again. And so all of those things are really important when you're trying to teach that connection early on.
So do you have an opinion on banning cell phones in schools? Because my students, if they get back a bad test, will immediately be on their phone
So,
texting someone.
It is really interesting to watch everything that's playing out right now.
Mhm.
So I have some kids who in some of the private schools get, I forget what the bag's called.
The shoe,
Yeah.
No, not
Oh.
the shoe. When they walk in the door in the morning, they come in with their bag, they have to put the phone in and it magnetizes shut. And
Oh,
one
no,
of
we
the
have a
schools in
shoe
the
bag that
area
they put their phones in.
the principal has a magnet and he stands at the door as they leave at the end of the day. And if you don't get your bag touched by this really high powered magnet, it won't reopen.
Oh, wow.
Oh.
And so there's no skipping out without going through the office. There's no, like, they're controlling these kids with this magnet.
Hmm.
And
Was it called the magnet school?
and the kid who switched to this private school, the cell phone and media, they had gotten in a lot of trouble in it. I mean, we actually had the police involved in some of the stuff that was going on, some of these social media apps for this family. And since this school year started, nothing. It has been amazing. So I am not a big fan of having 24 access,
Yeah.
24/7 access. And I think that the big issue initially was when I was talking to parents, was being able to get a hold of our kids if something happened in the schools.
Yeah.
Because
Right.
the terror of
That's
the
our
parents
argument.
letting their kids go in. So
Yeah.
I've been a big proponent of the gizmo watches. If the parents have enough anxiety
Yeah.
that they feel that they need to be able to connect with their kid, the gizmo watch is what I've been recommending for
What
the
is
younger
that?
guys. It's a watch where they can text and they can call and they can receive texts and calls, but the parents have to program the numbers in. And they can only, I think it's a limit of 10 numbers. But the parents determine which numbers can come and go. And they are able to control it from their own devices. And it is much more like, there's no like internet or it's just call and text. And then I also, and I know kids hate it when we do this, but I've had to switch a lot of kids over to actually the Bark phone. And Bark is a great app that can control everything, but you have to log in through the Bark app on an iPhone or an Android. And so instead of logging in, because then they can just log out and then go through another way. If you give them the actual Bark phone, everything is monitored and parents get alerts for certain terms. I've had things happen on some of these phones where like inappropriate pictures were taken that were never sent. But it's, what do you want to do with this information? As the parents, what are we doing with it? Are we using it to open a door for our kids? Or are we looking to catch them? And so being able to sit down with the kid when you get the alert and being able to say, hey, you know, I get alerts, so I am aware of what happened. What's going on? What's going on? Give me some information. And when parents open that door, a lot of those kids actually start coming to the parents and say, hey, you're going to get an alert. This just happened. And that it just creates connection and the mom and or dad, whichever parent is approaching whatever topic, is the safe person to talk to. They're going to guide me through this because kids, when they are more advanced in technology than us, they feel like they don't need us. And then they start navigating it on their phone and I'm going kind of down a little
Yeah.
rabbit hole here, like
They
I've
realize
had
they can't
some
control it.
of the kids who sexted with people in other countries and then have been blackmailed. And the kids have paid. And so, but they didn't feel like they could go to mom and dad. And why didn't they? Because we haven't had that open communication of, let's sit down. And I always talk about the guardrails. Like when you're giving a kid a device, there are guardrails. It's like the bowling alley. You get the really, really big ones at first. And we sit down and maybe every few nights we go through your texts together. And we see how you're communicating with other people.
Wow.
And we're talking about it. Well, how could you have said that nicely to them? I see that they really hurt your feelings here. And you also then know if their kids are getting bullied because a lot of kids are getting bullied through these phones.
Yeah. And I hate to talk again, but I haven't. It seems as if parents and grandparents really do want to be friends with their children. and their grandchildren. And taking that step to say, no, we need to have a time when we're not on a device. How do we build the courage and to do that? It just seems that generationally it's happened to us, and it just seems like even, that there's this whole parenting thing that no longer it has to be an authority. They're going to be a friend, and taking that step to take some time.
I think that's directly connected to what we're seeing, with increases in anxiety, which, you mentioned 9/11. Isn't it so interesting that increases for that generation that grew up as children watching that have been record high? It's an interesting correlation. But also looking at the fact of how much isolation we really feel. Their statistics range like very diversely on this, but approximately 1 out of 3 or 1 out of 5 people report feeling very isolated and lonely, adult Americans. And so it's like, I think what we're looking for is, I want that positive connection with my child, with my grandchild, and looking at dichotomy in life is unavoidable. 2 things that seemingly don't seem to go together can coexist healthily. And having that firm structure and also having that positive connection, they do coexist, and it's really looking at every relationship has healthy boundaries to it, and this is just asserting healthy boundaries. The ones that are really easy for us, we don't think about it intentionally setting them because they naturally, I respect you, respect me. We just kind of have that dynamic. But sometimes we do have to be more intentional with that, where it's like, hey, like, this is the boundary. Here's the hierarchy. As much as kids resist structure and, hierarchy, at the end of the day, it is what makes them feel safest because I know what to expect.
I mean, the girls talked about it, a 40-year-old child, a 50-year-old child. How do we, communicate with them that, oh, why are you on the phone when I'm talking to you?
Yeah, great idea. Yeah. I am like a huge fan of the garbage sandwich method, which is, my husband can see it a mile away now, where I'm like, I really value our relationship, right? So we're going to start off positive. Like Allison said, we want to start positive. It gets our mind like, well, yeah, I do too. Thank you. I am a great person to be in a relationship with. Because I care so much about a relationship, I feel like I have to say, X, Y, and Z is bothering me. Again, keep it in more passive voice, use more I language. The phone use, passive voice, bothers me because I just love you so much. I want to spend time like where we're intentionally talking. Maybe we can think of something together, partnership, collaboration, where we can like figure out what's a good time for us to both be device free. Thank you so much for listening to me. It's so great knowing I can always come to you. And that applies like a little bit of social pressure to them, right? Where it's like, okay, they're expecting me to rise up to this occasion to be open to hearing them. And we kind of like wrap that up nicely where it's like, we have a positive to start, we wrap it up with a positive, and we have constructive feedback in the center.
Michael Gibson has a question.
Yeah. There was an interesting piece on CBS Sunday Morning. I record that, don't have it conflict with church, of course, but record it and watch it later. And last week, there was a piece on CBS Sunday Morning about Finland, and Finland has the highest rate of, I guess, citizen knowledge of what is real and what isn't real. They are basically have a long border with Russia, and Russia is always trying to basically put all kinds of false information into Finland, and so they have basically been teaching their kids sensitivity to what is true and what is false in information. It's really, it's not a really long piece, but it's fascinating. And I encourage all of you to watch it. Just all you got to do, I think, is go CBS Sunday Morning Finland, and you'll probably get it. It's a short YouTube thing. Anyway, they concluded that episode with a quote, the quote from Daniel Patrick Moynihan that we're all familiar with, which is, "You're entitled to your own opinion, but not to your own facts." And I think that there is part of the problem that, we're all having is that it's one thing if we're not sensitive to someone else's feelings or, don't listen to them. It's another one when what they're saying is totally false. And I'm curious, what is your suggestion on how we can have effective communication with people who basically have no appreciation for what is actually true?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a great question. It depends. It depends on the relationship with that person that we have and the relationship that we want to have. Even for people that we are very, very close with, like we sometimes have to pick and choose, what battles we're going to fight. We can't die on every hill. Dr. Phil has a great quote that says, you can either be always right or you can be happy, but you cannot be both. And so sometimes it's looking at like, is this something I want to give energy to? Is it dangerous? Is it destructive? Can I even affect a change? And if the answer to those is no, I'm going to be like, yeah, 2 + 2 is 5 for you. That's great, and you have to like disengage from that. But it's not right. So I have to make sure people know it. We can present it. And if people are really resistant, that's kind of all we can do with that, because any further, trying to like push and push and push the facts, people aren't going to see that and not going to resonate with that.
Yeah, I've learned over time, if I hear a fact that I find to not be true, and I try to kindly say that maybe or possibly that there might be some more information or something, and if they come back stronger at me, I choose to disengage. I don't keep going because the energy behind it is not healthy for that interaction.
What Michael's talking about is our inner protectors go up. And they go up especially when they feel injustice, right? Something is not right. So there's something internalized in us that wants to fight against that. It's a really positive trait, right? But we have to look at, is it going to be effective? When we approach people about challenging belief systems, it's a couple questions I think are really helpful. Does it need to be said? Does it need to be said by me? Does it need to be said right now? And is the person that I'm saying this in a place to receive it? And if we get no's on any of those, then it just becomes, well, I'm draining my energy now. I'm investing in something like pouring, something down like a bottomless pit. It's never going to feel the way that I want it to be. And it's more about internally getting comfortable with that sense of injustice.
That all takes time though, because
It
you're
sure
having this
does.
conversation
It
and
does.
you're thinking these things while you're having the
Yeah.
conversation. And it's practice too.
It really is.
Yeah.
And you bring up a great point too, is that like when we feel like something that we hold really dear to us gets challenged, our fight or flight goes up. What we need to do is just calm our nervous system down. And the quickest way to do that is just by going slow, right? So instead of being like, no, wait. Okay, let me take a breath. Maybe like, like, how they always tell you, like in communication, don't use fillers. Sometimes they can be helpful, right? Where it's like, let me think, or how should I phrase that? Just give yourself that time to sit, recognize your own physical triggers. If, for example, when you start to get, upset about something, if your face gets hot, recognize that as a clue, like, oh, I'm getting emotionally charged. Let me navigate myself back down so I can hold that place.
I think Catherine.
A different age and a different question, but it builds on Gail's thing about time. I was with my granddaughter in the pool a few weeks ago, or actually just on Friday, and she started talking about that person must be a Jew because they're wearing a certain head things that Jews wear, and it's Rosh Hashanah, and she kept talking about the Jews, and I found myself we were in this dressing room where there are all kinds of people, and I just felt like, just because the way she was saying it was just, so my question is about timing and also about continuing a conversation that maybe happened at one point in time and you couldn't really deal with it right then, but you want to come back to it and just explored and how is the best way, especially with someone who's only 5. And I'm not, I think we have a connection. It's not, that's not the issue, but it's wanting to return to something.
Yeah, and it's always helpful to return to things when we're not in an emotionally heightened state. Right? So we're gonna want to like regulate ourselves. It's like when we engage in any kind of communication, you want to put the oxygen mask on yourself before you do anybody else's, right? So regulate your own emotions first, see what's coming up for you, and then put a mental pin in it for yourself, and then come back to it when everything feels a little bit more calm. Because when any of us are heightened, we're just not gonna learn, we're not gonna absorb as much as we would ordinarily. You know, our brain only functions at 100% capacity. What that means is if all of our brain functionality or capacity or energy runs into a specific area, like fight or flight, you know, our amygdala, that means the other areas like emotional reasoning and prefrontal cortex, that spot that's responsible for like logic, reason, decision-making, that's going to go down. In some ways, it's really helpful, right? Because if we were like getting chased by a lion and we were like sitting thinking, well, what's the best way to go? What's up? We probably get attacked. You know, that instantaneousness is helpful in the moment, but not to have some of these deeper conversations. And so getting to a point where everybody's like a little bit more centered, and then having like, hey, I just wanted to touch on something really quick. Like, this happened. Next time, maybe we can do this instead. What are your thoughts? Like whenever we present something to someone, we want it to be collaborative. Communication is like a two-way street. So ask her like, what did you think about that? Or how did you learn about that? And, you know, just kind of keep that conversation open.
Yeah, so in that exact context, so put some things around it here. I would say sooner is better than later. So like as soon as you're out of the dressing room and in the car, being able to say, you know, I noticed that you were really aware. Like how do we like point out all their positive traits of those positive traits and how they were stirring this and say, yeah, that is very true. Very true. When we see differences in people like that, we don't say them out loud in front of them. Like, so how do we acknowledge, validate, but then be able to say, let's just wait and ask us about it when they're not around.
Thanks.
Really probably are going to need to wrap this up. This has been a remarkable session. When we came up with this topic, I thought maybe we would just be able to scratch the surface, but these folks are so talented that they've gone deeper. I mean, it's not over yet. We all know that. We want to continue the conversation, but I don't know how we could find anything much more relevant as far as our faith is concerned than what we've been talking about today. And this is recorded. And Gina reminded me last Sunday that I said, well, contact me if you have any questions, and not everybody knows me. So I'm Carol Starr, and my email is carstarr@gmail.com. And if you have ideas about how we might continue the conversation, we can't thank you enough. This is just so meaningful and
for having us.
valid. Really, really. Yeah, thank you. Really, really. And this is World Communion and Service Sunday, so stick with us at church if you possibly can. There are lots of wonderful opportunities. And next Sunday also is very relevant to our whole program on understanding white nationalism and our history. We have Janine Smith, who is a Lakota descendant, enrolled citizen of the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara Nation. She's an archivist at Loyola University who's been rewarded for the quality of her work. And she will be looking at the troubled relationship between Native communities and Christianity, boarding schools, our own situation right here, as well as documenting land ownership after Native communities have been excluded from the record keeping process. This is something that we have just begun. And as a church, we're looking at how we can restore and heal these relationships. It may not sound as relevant as today, but it is in many ways. And we're just very, very blessed to have this community and the quality of really communication and connection that we've experienced. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you so
all.
much for having
Right,
us.
these folks are just wonderful.